Hello, everybody, again. Good evening. Sorry for the delay. Was getting things set up here a little bit. And so tonight's talk is going to be about overcoming obstacles. And it's not every day that everybody gets up and goes through life and everything goes completely swimmingly and smooth without any obstacles in the way. It's pretty simple generally. If things are going our way, people have a tendency to really not think about what's going on, or to just kind of go with the flow. And when things are not going their way, people have a tendency more to sit back and reflect. And so tonight I want to talk a little bit about emotion, and also obstacles in general, and some ways in which, when you face an obstacle, things you can do to help get over it. As you can see, there's a little collection of stuffed toys, animals around that were lovingly gathered by my friends, including little bear here. And so that's seems kind of silly maybe, but it's actually one small thing that can be done. If someone is having a bad day, or having some news and they need to have some support, like I was going through some obstacles myself recently, and so it's very touching to have the loving friendship of friends to be able to help out with going through it. And in fact, that's actually one of the things that sometimes I'll tell people about is, who is your support team? Who do you have around you? Sometimes when people are feeling down, they can very much contract and kind of go off into their own little world. And having other people around in a friendly way can be very helpful for keeping you from going down too much. So, little bears and such. In a friendly way can be very helpful for notwithstanding. Keeping you from going down too much. There's a few other things too. For example, hot chocolate is, believe it or not, it's one of those things. There's actually something in chocolate that helps to boost the mood, which is apparently why there's actually chocolate parties across Europe and other places nowadays where people are ingesting raw cacao in different ways as well. So anyway, so so basically things that you can do when faced with emotions and things. And of course, one of them is, it's if you end up deciding to kind of go and retreat and hide and all that kind of stuff, there's nothing wrong with that. But it does sometimes, the mind, when it starts to draw negative, sometimes it has a tendency to just kind of keep going in that direction. And sometimes having other people around can be a little bit of a fail-safe to keep you from getting too far down. And so when people are talking about risk factors for things like bigger issues, like not just like a bad day, but more like long-term depression or suicide or other things along those lines, having a good support around you was actually seemed to be very protective. When we're counseling patients, we often will ask, what do you have to live for? What is it that's preventing you from harming yourself, or from having darker thoughts or scary thoughts, as it were? And so there can be a big difference between having some of those so-called darker thoughts or scary thoughts, or wanting to hurt yourself or others, and actually wanting to go out and take action on that. It's actually my line of work. It's pretty common that I meet people that are actually in depression or suicidal, or something along those lines. And there's a very big difference between the fleeting thought of something kind of going in, that's, I take it as a sign of crying for help, where people are basically saying, I need help, I need something to help me, and to kind of lift me up, and to go on. And so, again, knowing the difference between a fleeting desire and some more actions is a very important thing to discern. And so if you know of anybody that's talking in those terms, please reach out to them, give them a hug, talk to them, and let them know that you value them, that you're a part of their world. And reach out to them as well. So, other things you can do. Of course, eating a plant-based lifestyle is something I'm always going to recommend because, well, it tends to work. It tends to also be a very good barrier as well, because the more plants that you eat, the better the neurotransmitters are in the brain, and people tend to sleep better, and to get more enthusiasm and such. I mentioned a few videos ago, actually a few months ago now, about one of my patients that was pre-diabetic and had adopted a mostly plant-based lifestyle. And then she came back, and not only was her pre-diabetes gone, but she basically said, and oh my gosh, I feel so much better. She hadn't even realized that she was feeling sick and feeling kind of down on the previous diet. Avoiding junk food is also very good as well, because the fat, salt, and sugar that's in the junk food has a tendency to also not only be addictive, but also people tend to feel not as good as well. Exercise is another wonderful thing. Going out for a walk. So when you move the in some way or another, basically it also activates the brain, it activates the mind, and it helps you to release those hormones and to release those biochemical factors that tend to keep people a little bit down. And so the idea of just going into the bed and pulling the covers up and kind of vegetating, sometimes that can be helpful, so I'm not entirely against that. But in the long haul, sometimes people actually feel better when they get activated. And in cognitive behavioral therapies, they actually call that activation therapy, where they just get the person to agree to something that will get them moving, even if it's as little as walking out to the mailbox and back, at least to have something within their reach that they feel that they're able to do. Actually, the mailbox story reminds me of one of my patients, about 10 years ago, somewhere in that realm, that they basically were using the mailbox as one of their ways of getting fit. And the way that they told me the story was they had some sort of heart disease or blood pressure problems or diabetes, and what they wanted to do is they knew that for their heart they needed to get some exercise, but they also knew that they were terribly out of shape. They were sitting on the couch a lot, or using the clicker muscles more than the big body muscles. And her actual statement was, okay, I know I can make it to the mailbox. And so she just started off by walking to the mailbox. And then once she got to the mailbox, she said, I think I can make it to that telephone pole down the street. And just every day, very steady habit was built up of just something small that she could do in the moment. And basically every day went just a little bit further. And then a few months later, she came back in and told me that she was riding blocks on her bicycle now. And it was lovely because she knew that she had some obstacle to exercise, mostly because she hadn't been doing it for a long time, which is maybe contributed to things like the heart disease and such. But she was determined to make a difference and to make a change. And basically one step led to the next, and and she was quite enjoying getting out and riding around the block with her bicycle every day. And so it was a lovely story for a few reasons. One, because when I originally told the story, I was actually giving a presentation on this very same topic of what do you do when that big fat no comes up in your day. And as a clinician, I see that a lot, because a lot of times I'll have people come to me, they are having a problem and they ask for professional advice on that problem. And sometimes they're open to hearing some of the things that might be contributing to it, and some of the things that they might be able to do to help reverse or prevent that problem, and sometimes not so much. And so the original talk was on overcoming no. I have that somewhere in my archives. Maybe I'll post that up here one of these days as well. Might enjoy that as well. So other things. One thing I've noticed in clinic and in life in general is that a lot of times people tend to be a little bit afraid of emotions, just as a society and a culture. We tend to be taught, for example, that men are supposed to be strong and stoic and never shed a tear or never have any kind of emotions, and women, it's a little bit more open to expressing the emotions, but not necessarily. Basically, there's still some taboo events. You can do a little bit, but not too much, or something along those lines, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so there is, generally speaking, a little bit of a reluctance to actually experience some of these emotions. And so I gotta say, there's a little bit of a fine line as well, because if some emotions and such are to the point where it's interfering with someone's ability to live life, obviously there are many, many cases where a counselor is very, very valuable and helpful as well. And sometimes where not even a professional counselor, but a trusted member of the clergy or somebody that's a close friend or a family member can be around to help out. Or in the case of here, I've got my friends that were kind enough to throw together a pile of stuffed animals. But basically, the idea is that I encourage people not to be afraid of having emotions. Sometimes you just go through a bad day. Sometimes it's just things happen. And if we're afraid of emotion, then that gives an additional layer of difficulty in overcoming it, because then you're kind of pushing against what the body and what the mind are inclined to experience. Something else is, if you focus on something in the here and the now, that's also very, very helpful as well. Minds have a little bit of a tendency to do two things. They have a tendency, do a lot more than two, but they have a tendency in general to either focus on the past or fantasize about the future. And they don't really tend to stick around in the here and now kind of point. And so what things like exercising and drinking hot chocolate and doing things that involve breath awareness, body awareness, tension and relaxation exercises, a lot of these different things can be tools and techniques to bring you back into the present. So one question sometimes I'll ask is, when you catch yourself going into one of these directions or the other, let's say that you're worried about your boss having a review on you or something, and you're sitting there thinking, oh, what are all the many things that they could say, and the mind starts to fantasize a little bit. And you could, or whatever the situation is for you, you can bring yourself back to the present moment and say, is there a boss in the room right now? And is there a tiger in the room? I mean, there's no boss. And sorry, my friend's imitating a tiger in the corner. You're not a real tiger, go away. um, and so I've got multiple tigers in the room right now. And so you ask yourself, is there really something going on right here and now? And if you're honest, you have to say, nope, that's not happening right here, right now. There's really no tigers in the room. There's no mosses or anything along those lines. But anyway, the idea is that if you have something that brings you into the present moment, whatever that may be, that it helps to break the sway of the mind going to the past or the future. And I want to bring out a little something that sometimes I'll talk about with folks as well. And this is a kind of a simple way of thinking about emotions and such. And just want to point out the section here is that pretty much all these emotions and such, it can also be a way of self-reflecting and looking at, well, what was the desire that was missing, or what was the desire that was not fulfilled that caused the frowny face kind of emotions. And basically it's a way of using whatever you have going on currently to be able to introspect and to kind of ask yourself within, what was the cause of that emotion, or what was the desire that was not fulfilled that resulted in that as well. And so, not that answers will necessarily come out right away, but you might be surprised sometimes things come up. So the basic principle there is that we go through life with thousands and thousands of various desires. Sometimes those desires are fulfilled, and we have the pleasure and such. And sometimes the desires are not so fulfilled, and we get the frowny face, so to say. And the idea there is sometimes when things are, thank you. Here's a better frowny face. Oh, this looks like he's having a really, really bad day or something. But anyway, so sometimes we're consciously aware of what's going on when we have the, happy or the frowny face or whatever that is going on, and sometimes we're not as aware. And so sometimes when we feel ourselves getting kind of caught in a strong emotional state, everything can be used as food for reflection or for introspection or for self-awareness. And when those things are brought up, then it's a little bit easier to figure out what to do about those things, or to just simply stay with them for a little while, because every thought, every emotion, everything that comes to you also can go away as well, just as easily as it came up. And sometimes what happens is we get a little bit of a frowny thought, and we go off in our own worlds, in our own heads, and we can kind of latch onto that. And what ends up happening is that seed sprouts like a train, and next thing you know, you got said frowny thought, and then another one comes along, and we're dragging stuff out from the past, and then off we go. And the next thing you know, this little guy is like taking over your world for a little while. And again, life has its ups and downs. Yeah, sometimes when faced with a bad situation, it would not be necessarily appropriate to be, smiling in certain situations. But the more that you get to know yourself, the more this guy tends to not come up as much. Or if he does come up, the more he tends to kind of come and go and not necessarily get stuck to or clung to, and so forth as well. So anyway, so some of those techniques for allowing the obstacles or the challenges of life to kind of come and allowing them to go away. Introspection can be a wonderful, wonderful thing to just as we get more skilled with being able to witness the emotions as they come and go in the theater of life, then more and more these things don't end up holding on to you as much as they do in the beginning. So, alrighty. Well, I guess that was kind of my little talk today. Just as you go through life, there will be challenges. This would not be life without obstacles. You cannot go to new shores unless you've got wind to fill out your sails and to help drive things along. And so just wanted to say hello and love you guys all and keep smiling, and also love you to my friends who are here very nicely supportive and know you're not a tiger. Alrighty, so have a good night, everybody. Take care. Stay strong.